it's been a wonderful day so far, and it's going to be a beautiful rest of the day. One of the things we've been doing during this Christmas series is looking at some of the characters of Christmas. So at Carol's, we looked at the shepherds. And a couple of weeks ago, Brett looked at the wise men. Last week, I looked at Herod the Horrible. And just looked at some of these guys, because it's so easy to look at the Christmas story. We've all heard it 1,000 times before, right? But to look at the Christmas story and to forget that these are real people living real spaces. And today I'd like to look at two Christmas characters, if you like, who don't get a lot of shine. We might not even know that they're sort of part of the Christmas story. This was a little bit later when Jesus was dedicated at the temple, but he was still a baby, so I think we could leverage it. Right, I think it could still be part of the Christmas story. So I'm going to read this morning from Luke chapter 2, from verse 22. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. And here's the first character. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. Then down to verse 6, our other character. There was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. So the Bible thinks 84 is really old. She never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel. Now, friends, this time of year, we remember, besides all the Christmas cake and all the things that go with Christmas and presents, we remember the fact that God was the one who gave us a gift. He gave us the gift of his Son. And then when Jesus was here on earth, as he gets older, he makes this promise to mankind where he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He makes a promise. And so this gift that we've been given is this always gift. Some of the gifts that we receive, the Take-A-Lot gift that we are so excited to get. And then when it arrives, it's amazing the moment you open it and hold it in your hands, how the shine just, do you know what I mean? Wah, wah, wah. It's like not as exciting as it was when it was in the post. But Jesus is this always gift that God has promised to us. And so he's given to us. But one of the issues sometimes when it comes to our relationship with God is kind of the space between when he makes promises to us and those promises are fulfilled. That little space in between. It's a little bit like my daughters have discovered Temu and Shein, yes. And their pocket money is going offshore, like all the time. And the moment that tracking number hits, right, they are mashing and refreshing and tracking that thing, what aeroplane it's on, the pilot's name, right, where he lives, his personal phone number so they can phone him and track it. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, Ams, don't be so outraged. But, yes. Okay, I do use Temu a little bit more than you. I agree. But friends, there's this space in between the promise of something and then the receiving of that thing. And that can be really tricky for us as human beings sometimes. In this story, these two characters that we look at, Simeon and Anna, give us a beautiful biblical picture or a biblical understanding of how do I handle the spaces in between. What do I do when I'm stuck in those spaces in between? Because it's very easy for us, friends. Like, how long after a promise is made before I begin to believe it's a lie? You know what I mean? I made a promise, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. At what point does my heart go like water, and I'm just like, like it's never, ever going to happen? And it's very easy for us to think like that. And I think sometimes when we consider the gift of who Jesus is at Christmas, it can be so easy for us just to be like, we'll just chuck him in the cupboard with the rest of the gifts and wait until I have to do one of those weird re-gift things, on Christmas Day where we all swap stuff we don't like. But to continue to value and know that that gift, know that that promise from God is still as relevant today as it is tomorrow and as it is the next day. So let's have a look at Simeon quickly if we can. These two people. So the first one is, it says about Simeon, there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon who was righteous and he was devout. Now, we don't really use those words, right? I've never seen that on someone's CV before. Here's Daniel. Went to this school, he's righteous and devout. But those two words have got a profound meaning and they are profoundly affected the ability for Simeon to actually live to see that promise fulfilled. I'll explain what I mean. Righteousness means this, that what God says is true no matter what is said, no matter what else is said. And I live according to that. That I choose to be in right standing with God rather than right standing with anyone else. Righteousness. And that is done as God gives me that ability. And so Simeon lives this life. And devout means that he's devoted to that thing. So it wasn't just like one day he wakes up and he's like a rush of blood to the head. Don't know, maybe he had some whatever the night before when he felt particularly G'd up. And so today he's going to be righteous. And then the next day, not so much. There was stuff going on and traffic and, lost his temper or whatever. But he's righteous, but he's also devoted to that righteousness. And the two things those allowed him to do, firstly, was to receive the promise in the first place. Something I often find just talking to people, it's amazing how we can think that, God really loves the other person. He loves the person sitting next to me. You know what I mean? Like he knows the person sitting next to me. But as for me, it feels like he sort of looks past me. Why do I always hear these stories about what God did for that person and what God did for that person and what God did for that person? And there's something that Simeon did in this righteousness and devotion that allowed him to be the person who received the promise. If I had to ask this question, can God speak to anyone? Of course he can. Does God speak to anybody? Of course he does. He spoke through a donkey once. God can. But something that I've come to see, friends, is that God's voice is heard loudest on God's path. And the only voice of God that's heard off God's path is one message. Return to the path. That's the only message you're going to hear when you're not on God's path. Seriously. And it doesn't really sound like a promise, does it? But as I walk in God's path, devoted to righteousness, that's where God speaks. And I think so often, those of us who are looking, going, where's God? Is God real? What's God doing? God, where are you? Like, hold the line, because on God's path is where God speaks. And that's what Simeon did up front. So he receives this promise. If I depart from the path, I can still sort of hear his voice. But the problem is there's a lot of voices out there. So Cindy, one of the things she loves is in the evening. Sometimes, the devotionals that I send out to the church in the week, sometimes I record them the night before. Oh, shock horror. Anyway. But when I'm recording them, Cindy's always like, oh, babe, just record a devotional next to me in bed because your voice is like the radio. It's so soothing. So as I start generating these pearls of wisdom and I'm out there pouring myself out, this is what the Bible says, not even 20 seconds, Cindy's out. My voice is like a drone. It's so comforting. It's like the radio. And then she wakes up, oh, babe, do another one. A little bit of an inside line into the Anderson's intimate world. But what we see about Simeon is, so now he's been walking on God's path and he receives the message, right? Because God's voice is heard on God's path. But friends, this is where the devotion now kicks in. Because it is years and years, right, until that promise is fulfilled. Because he's promised that he will not die before he sees Jesus. And this is where the devotion kicks in. Because I wonder what would have happened if Simeon received that promise and then at some stage he was like Eli, the prophet Eli from the Old Testament, who got worn down by people's opinions and what people were saying and his sons and his family. And eventually he's just like, let's pack this one in. Simeon would have received the promise, but he would never, he would have got the tracking number. But it's almost like he would have moved house. And so Buffalo Logistics would have arrived at his house. And no one was there. And so that's where the devotion kicks in. Because in the second part, it says, moved by the Spirit, he entered the temple courts. I don't know how long it happened after that, but it's a long time. So one day, just another day, like all the other days, chilling, doing his thing, devoted himself to God. And suddenly in that moment, years later, God speaks, go to the temple. And he goes in, and poof, there's Jesus. And friends, if we're going to live a life that's like, well, when I need to be righteous and devoted to God, and appreciate this gift of Jesus. If I think I'm going to do it when I think I need it, it's too late to try and hear the voice of God when I need to hear the voice of God. Way too late then. It's really hard to find the path when I've off-roaded off the path. That my story isn't once upon a time in a faraway land I became a Christian, but that I have a now faith, that today I know the voice of God. And I'm not sitting there mashing the button on the tracking number, right? I'm going, I know it will come in time. What's important is for me to stay on that path of righteousness and devotion. As I stick to that path, I know in time the promise will be fulfilled. During COVID, we had to order a bunch of these webcams because we know it's a stream church. Guys, there are still things that were never delivered. They entered a warehouse somewhere and just whoop. And it would be so tragic for us if there were the promises of God when I look in His Word and I see what He's promised us, that He'll never leave us nor forsake us, that He's the one in charge of our provision. He's the one who's in charge of our peace, that I'm not running around all over the place and my mind is on fire just with stress and all these things. Like all of this stuff, if I'm living with all of that and I'm not receiving the gift of who Jesus is because I've chosen to do it my way, I'm waiting, I'm devoted, I'm following, I want to know Him. So that's Simeon. Then we get Anna. Now, Anna didn't get a tracking code. Like, she didn't even order anything. She had more self-control. She browsed, she put it in her cart, but she never pushed checkout. Okay? There's a few of us like that. Good, Amber. Good to be honest there. So, if we look at the life of Anna, like we can kind of skim past it, but she was 84 years old, so she'd be married for 7 years. Back in those days, you'd get married somewhere between 13 and 18. They were a lot younger back in those days. So let's say she got married late, at 17. And she was married for 7 years. That means her husband died when she was 24, and she had lived 60 years by herself. 60 years by herself. And it says this about her, like what did she do during these 60 years of waiting? It says she worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. She had a hunger to be with God. Now, we can't all quit our jobs and, put on a loincloth and fast and pray every day at home. But what the Bible does do is it gives us a picture of these people, this picture of Anna, as a challenge to us about, so what does devotion look like for you? Because I might not be able to fast and pray all day like she did, but she devoted herself to God every single day. Friends, for 60 years she devoted herself to God with no tracking number, with no promise, with nothing in the mail, just devoted herself to God. It's so interesting. In Isaiah chapter 55, Isaiah says this, "Why spend money on that which is not bread, and your labor on that which does not satisfy? Listen to me carefully and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of foods." And friends, what we spend our 60 years on, what she spent her 60 years on, mattered. This eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's the Roman version of YOLO, which is the stupid person's version of carpe diem, right? Latin, modern, Roman. And there can be this thing of like, I'm just going to live for today. I'm just going to make the most, because who knows what comes. And what I spend my time, my energy, my resource, what I spend that stuff on matters, friends. Because when she held that path, even though she didn't have the tracking number, she got to see the Christ, the promise. And friends, the same is true of us. If I want to see Jesus at work in my life, if I want to keep appreciating that gift of who he is to me, there is a devotion that needs to come. What am I spending my time on? It's so interesting. When you read this text backwards, that text I just read, listen to me carefully, eat what is good, your soul will delight in the richest of foods. If you read it backwards, it says this: if I obey God and I walk with him, I will live in the best of everything. If I obey God, I will find that obedience to him is the richest of food. It is. Because I've developed the appetite for it. I won't begrudgingly and with a sour face obey him, but I will delight in my obedience to God. And then it becomes the richest of foods. And friends, what this means is that I've cultivated these appetites within me. I wonder what it must have been like for Anna. Because she would have had to cultivate, for instance, forgiveness over vengeance. Because back in those days, it was incredibly shameful to be unmarried and not have children. And so for 60 years, she's just at the temple. People are like, and in her heart, Lord, you know what? Let me leave them in your hands. Let me leave them in your hands. She fed the appetite of forgiveness over vengeance. Mercy over judgment. She would have known what was going on in the town. You know, that guy's a serial killer. You know, that chick gossips. That guy there cheats on his taxes. That guy's a tax collector and gathers money for the Romans. He's a Jew who sided against the Jews with the Romans. Oh my word, Skanda. And he's coming to the temple asking for forgiveness. I'm here every day, devoted to God. Who's this chick? Who's this guy? No, I choose to feed the appetite of mercy over judgment. I'm so glad they're here. I'm so glad they are just in the presence of God. I'm so glad they get to experience this. And she fed that appetite. Understanding over presumption. So easy for us, friends. You know, we look at the situation and you just, boop. Because we can make snap judgments about stuff. We are the most informed generation. Everyone's a sort of a pseudo-psychologist nowadays, right? We've all got our pseudo-psychology degree on the wall. We all sort of understand the love languages and all the hoo-ha. And we can jump to presumptions instead of taking time, spending time with people. What is your story? Hey man, how did you get to where you got to? Like, what has been your journey? And as we begin to understand people, right? And begin to feed that appetite of understanding rather than presumption, right? It holds me on that path. An appetite for honesty over deception. Not lying, not cutting corners. Friends, it's incredibly difficult for God to find us when we are not being honest. Incredibly difficult. You know when we're pretending? How are you? Oh, hallelujah. Full of the joys of Christmas today. My heart boundeth within me. I've got a holly above my head. But friends, it's very hard when we harden our hearts and we put up a sign on the outside that just says, I'm fine. And we feed that appetite of I'm fine. Friends, stuff starts to fester and get rotten on the inside. But feeding the appetite of honesty. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Could I ask this? Could it be that our drivenness and our lack of satisfaction at what we do is because we are hungering and thirsting after the things that don't bring fulfillment, that can't bring fulfillment? She spent 60 years devoted to the things that mattered, feeding those things, those appetites. Why did it matter? Well, she hadn't received any promise, but she was living in the house of God, and she got to meet the Christ because of what she spent her 60 years on. So beautiful. And friends, she wasn't passive during that time because it says she was a prophet. She didn't just go there and sit in the corner and you know what I mean? Like, she was like properly involved. She's used to hearing the voice of God, used to being in the presence of God. I'll finish with this. I'm trusting that as this Christmas leads into our new year, friends, I mean, just understand what it means to be devoted, to live righteous, to have our eyes on who God is, to appreciate this gift. The gift of Jesus is only appreciated on God's path. Outside of God's path it's all the other options, right? All the other things that are available to us. I hope that we've got big dreams. I hope we've got high hopes. I hope some of us have got some crazy ideas that you're just like, oh my word. I cannot wait for things to open up again. Because, friends, we do serve a God who speaks to us, just like he spoke to Simeon. And when we spend time with him, he begins to drop things in our hearts. And not always like big business ideas to become a multimillionaire. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about that something changes about us. Something changes about our circumstance because God has spoken to us. Can I encourage us to be faithful in the spaces in between, in the gaps, while you've got your tracking number? And even if you don't have a tracking number, and it's really helpful that you've got Simeon and Anna, because some of us do have a tracking number. Some of us are like, I don't know what that means to have a promise from God. And Anna still speaks to that. Can I encourage us to not take a holiday from our faith? Let's enjoy the richest of earthly foods and of spiritual foods as we follow Jesus himself.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you think you're about taking this further, you can follow us on our website. There you will find access to our previous sermons, our banking details, or if you just want to contact us. If you consider yourself to be part of Center Church, we'd just like to thank you for your continuous support and partnership. Have a sick day.